Jesus stood behind a pulpit, and what did he do? He taught the laws of the denomination that he was rabbi of, teacher of, taught their laws for their beliefs for a God. Welcome to the Simplicity of God. What makes Jesus any different from any other preacher who stands behind the pulpit and teaches the laws for their belief systems, denominations? Uh, what makes him different from a Catholic Pope who stands behind the pulpit and teaches the laws for that belief? What makes him different from the Mormon who stands behind the pulpit and does the very same thing? And what about Jehovah's Witness? Uh, what about, man, you name it, Baptist, Methodist, Assemblies of God, Pentecostal, uh, even atheists, they have their laws for a God, their beliefs about a God, and they preach it. This is what we believe about God. What happened after Jesus taught those laws from a very young age of about 12, he started until he was about 30 years old. And something changed in the man. Something drastically changed in the man. And this is what I want to look at today. What caused that change for Jesus to step out from the law and became who the God of love would have us be. And he taught very plainly that God is a spirit and man is a temple of him. And I've quoted this scripture 1,000 times or more. Luke 17, verse 20 and 21, the kingdom of God does not come with observation. It is within you. It's not in a Catholic church. It's not in a Baptist church. It's not in Muslim. It's within you. It's who you are. If who you are is of the beliefs of the laws for a belief, and mind you, beliefs are not real. Beliefs are only speculation. And you can believe anything about a God proven so many times in these some 35,000 known denomination religious beliefs for God. That's a lot of different beliefs, folks. Who has it right? Baptists? Do they have it right? How about the Catholics? They say they have it right. The Mormons, they say they have it right. The Jews that Jesus taught, they say they have it right. And you know what? Every one of these denominations do the very same thing with Jesus as the Jews did when he walked out of their laws and became like the author of it, God himself. When God himself came to that man, and it is proven in Matthew 3:16 that God came to Jesus, opened up his heaven, who he is, what he is, and all of it in it within Jesus. Our churches, our denominations are no different from the Jews of the day. They look at Jesus as an object for worship, and many of them claim that Jesus is God. or was God. Jesus is no longer with us. That God no longer exists. It's gone. It's buried in the grave. It's returned to dust. Jesus was a man made of a woman, born of the law, just as you and I, no different at all. The difference came from a realization, a knowledge, the same knowledge that Adam gained in the garden. And if you'll read Genesis 3:22, and that man, Adam, became like God to know this difference, the same difference that Jesus came to know in Matthew 3:16. Abraham, Moses, Mary, 120 in the upper room, they all received that same knowledge. They stepped out of the laws for God. Some say God is three persons. And they're doing exactly as the Jews did. They're denying the very God who comes within man himself, who is knocking at your door this day, wanting, and any man who will open that door and let him in, he will come to you just as he did all of these, and he will sup with you, and he will be in you. Revelation 3:20, read it. And Jesus said, in that day you shall ask me nothing. If Jesus was God, why would he make a statement like that? You'll ask me nothing, but go to the Father for yourself, and he will give it to you. Does that sound like Jesus was telling you folks that he is God? You know, I I look at all of this, and I was part of it. I I gave my life over to God in a little Pentecostal church way back in 1974. And I went to then from there I went to a non-denominational church where it was all happy days, praise God, given it shall be given you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, will man given to your bosom. And all they see in that is dollar signs. Joel Osteen is a prime example of that very thing. I knew Joel when he was just a child. John, his daddy, used to come to our church in Arlington, Texas, Arlington Christian Center. Jimmy Hester was the pastor there, and John preached and taught there. And Joel was just a young boy, and his sister, I forgot her name. Anyway, I watched uh, Joel grow up, and he's doing the very same things that any denomination does, is preach a law, a belief, and has turned the gospel into dollar signs. Given it shall be given you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, will man given to your bosom. You give $1, God's going to give you $100 back. Come on, people. When are people going to wake up? Because our churches are, the ways of Christ are being thrown out the window with the baby. It's really sad to me. Uh, if all of these pastors in these churches did what Jesus did and stepped out from that law that they are holding to, well, this is the way of God no matter what, and I'm going to go to the grave believing this. If they would all step out from behind that pulpit and do as Jesus did, go out and hit the streets, go out to the prison, go out to the hospital, go out and do what Jesus did. And Jesus said, if you can't believe what I say, believe that what I do. When you look at your pastor, What does he do? Does he go into the prisons? Does he go in? Does he go into the hospital? Does he go into these uh, uh, rest homes? I don't like to call them rest homes. What's the name for them? Assisted living. Into the streets and sit down with a homeless person and hold his hand and show him the love of God. Don't just say, "Hey, Jesus saves." Come on, show him what salvation really is. There's been a kid that's been coming to my house, and I'm 80 years old. There's this kid that's been coming to my house for the last 2 or 3 months, and he's got tattoos on his eyelid, and he's got tattoos on his face, and all this stuff. And when he first knocked on my door, he was wanting to do some work around. He said he wanted to rake the leaves in my yard. That was this last fall. So I let him. And he was honest with me in the beginning. He says, I know the way I look. He said, but I'm trying to better myself. I'm trying to, he says, I'm a opiate addict. He says, I'm trying to break away from it. He says, I'm going to this clinic, and I said, you're on methadone now, aren't you? Yeah, I'm on methadone, and that stuff is just as bad or worse than heroin. And so I hired him, and I was going to let him paint my studio. The outside of my studio needed to be sanded off and repainted. So I was gonna let him do that and pay him to do that. He worked one day, and of course he wanted his money for that day, and I paid him. And the next day he come and he worked about half a day, and he wanted his money. And I knew what he was doing. You know why? Because I've been down that road myself. He was trying to get money to go and get whatever he needed for a fix. And I'm not going to mention his name. So he worked about half a day, got his money. And when he left, he said he had to go home. Well, he said, I'll be back. I'll be out here at 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, okay, well, 7 o'clock came. He didn't show up. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock. He didn't show up. So about 2 or 3 days later, he showed up. And he was ready to go to work. And evidently, he had gotten enough money to sustain him for 2 or 3 days. And I said, and then I told him, I said, look, this is when you tell a man that you're going to do something, you do it. I said, I don't need you anymore. And then I said, let's talk. So I said, okay, I've been down that road. I used to sell the stuff. I said, there are rehab clinics around that can help you. Go and sign up. And I didn't go to a rehab. I just come to a point to where I got so low, I said, no more. That was it, no more. And we were driving down the road with a friend of mine. I'm not going to mention his name. We had a box of stuff between us of all kinds. You name every kind of pill and everything you can imagine was in this box. And I said, okay, no more. And we were going down 820 Loop in Fort Worth, Texas. And we were fixing to get on 121 to go to Irving. We turned that corner, and I looked at him and I said, no more. I've had enough. I'm not doing this anymore. I grabbed that box and I rolled down the window, and I grabbed that box and threw it out the window. Man, he lit into me. He said, you crazy. There were thousands of dollars worth in that box. I said, no more. No more. I'm not doing it anymore. I've had enough. This stuff is killing me. So I tried to convey that to this young man. I said I had to stop. I had to, and folks, that urge to go back to that life hung with me for almost 2 years. I had that urge, just a little bit. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. No more alcohol, no more drugs, no more anything. I went cold turkey, and it was tough because those urges would come back and come back and come back, and I had to say no, no. Even eating a turkey dinner, I want to crave a cigarette. I said no, no, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to smoke that cigarette because I gave my life over to the Lord, and I was going to stick to it. Well, this kid, he kept coming to the door, and I went ahead and sanded my studio myself, and it's a pretty good size. It's 40 foot, and it's about 20 foot wide. Pretty good sized building. And I'm an old man. I'm 80 years old, so I climbed the ladder, I ground it off, and I painted it myself. And he come by one day, and he said, "I'm ready to paint." I said, "I'm sorry, man. I've already got it painted. I painted it myself." And he come, and I said, I've got no money for you." So he come by one day, and he he had a bunch of copper, and he wanted me to take him to this place to sell this copper. I didn't know where he got it, but it gave me an opportunity to talk to him. So I put him in my truck. We went to this metal place, and I asked him where he got the copper, and he did odd jobs around. I know he did odd jobs around because I'd seen him before working around the neighborhood. So I took him and exchanged this copper for, I think it was 40. It was $40 because he couldn't do it because he didn't have a driver's license. They wouldn't take it unless he had a driver's license. So I took him and got his $40, and I didn't see him again for a couple of weeks. And he come by wanting to rake the leaves or do something. I said, no, no, I'm done with you. If you're not going to try to help yourself, there's nothing I can do to help you. Nothing at all. If you're not going to try to help yourself, I can't help you. So yesterday, the doorbell rang, and I answered it, and he was standing at the door, and he said he just asked me how I was because he knew I was kind of in bad health. I've got some cancers and stuff that I've been dealing with, and I'm not in tip-top shape. Like I say, I'm 80 years old, but I can still get around pretty good. Anyway, he knew I was feeling bad there for a while. He just said, I just wanted to check on you and see how you was feeling. And he had a whole different demeanor. His face was not flush and white like it was. It had color, a nice, rich red, uh, natural color. And he said, I just want to tell you that I signed into rehab. Says I've been in rehab now for nearly 2 weeks, and he says they let me out, and he says I hadn't had anything in 2 weeks, and I told him, I said, man, that's the best news I've had in a long time. And so we set out on the. I have a front porch swing. This old house was built in 1950. It had this big old front porch and a porch swing. We so I let him. I went outside and let him over there, and we sat on that porch swing, and I talked to him for a while. And I told him, I kept telling him, I said, Caleb, now you've got to start here. And I said, now the urge is going to come for you to go right back to that same thing. And he says, I know. And I said, it's going to be really tough. I know. I said, now, if you give in to it, you're going to be right back where you started from. I know. And I told him, I said, when that urge comes, you just have to say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to let that demon get me again. And that's what I told him. I said, you can pray to Jesus until you go to a grave. You can pray to God until you go to a grave. But until you decide you want to step out of the laws of that addiction, there's nothing that God can do. There's nothing that Jesus can do. It's not in their hands. Your salvation is in your hands. What you do with it. And folks, and and he walked away with a smile on his face. He shook my hand. And he told me again, he told me this before, he said, nobody's ever treated me like you treat me. Folks, that was my reward for the whole thing right there. So, standing in a pulpit and looking noble toward man, that's futile. Now, if that preacher would gather up 1,000 people and go out here to these homeless people shelters, and over here, not far from me, where they hand out food and clothing and, gosh, folks, yeah, it's easy to stand in the pulpit and say, go and do it. But it's another thing when you say, don't believe what I say, believe that what I do. Watch what I do. And Jesus went about doing what God had told him to do, and what happened? The very ones that he once taught as a rabbi, taught their laws, and just as all our denominations today do, Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Joyce Myers, and Jesse Duplantis, and that list goes on and on. It's easy to say, yeah, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. It's easy to look noble toward man, but it's a completely different thing to be as Jesus was in the Father. That's a whole different scenario, folks. And either you are that person of Christ that Jesus preaches, that had him crucified because, no, they didn't want to. They didn't want to sacrifice themselves. They didn't want to give up their life for a brother or a friend. Come on, guys. Christianity is not preached anymore. The only thing that's preached are the laws for a belief for God. And as I've said 1,000 times, one can believe anything about a God so proven in all these denominations, from Catholic all the way to Muslim, all the way to atheist, you name it, they have a belief about a God. Instead of being like him and in his same image, it has nothing to do with what you're looking at here, because Jesus was very clear that spirit that God is does not have flesh and bone as you see me. And people take that and twist it all around and still accuse him, falsely accuse him of being God. Even when he said, spirit does not have flesh and bone as you see me, people don't listen to Jesus at all. That just does not suit their beliefs. Hey guys, love y'all. Think about that. Who are you? Are you that person of Christ that you are supposed to be, as Jesus was, anointed of God, instead of anointed of some man's laws from a pulpit? Which one are you of? Every single one of you know in your heart who you are, and what you believe, instead of living the actuals of being. Love you guys. Think about it. Bye bye.